Chapter 1: Key Definitions in Political Science. Good morning, everyone. Today we begin our journey into the study of political science by laying a foundation. Chapter 1 introduces us to the key definitions and concepts that shape this discipline. Think of this chapter as the grammar of politics, the basic rules and terms we need before we can form full sentences and analyze the world of government. Let's start with the word government. At its most basic, government is the system through which a society organizes itself, distributes power, and makes decisions for the common good. Government provides the framework for order, security, and services, from roads to schools to healthcare. Without government, we would be left with chaos and uncertainty. But government doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is filled with politics. Politics is the practice of gaining and exercising authority within government. It is about making decisions on how to allocate resources, how to enforce laws, and how to balance competing interests. Politics can be messy, and it often involves conflict, because different groups want different things. Yet politics is also about cooperation, finding ways to work together for shared goals. One of the earliest thinkers to influence our ideas about politics was John Locke. Locke argued that people are born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and that government exists only with the consent of the governed. His ideas became the backbone of modern democracy. On the economic side, Adam Smith emphasized free markets and competition, highlighting how economic freedom is tied to political liberty. These two thinkers remind us that political science is never just about laws or leaders. It is about deeper ideas of human freedom and responsibility. Now let's clarify something important. Power and authority. Power is simply the ability to influence others, to get someone to do what they might not otherwise do. But authority is legitimate power, power that society recognizes as rightful. Think about the difference between a robber demanding your wallet and a police officer issuing you a fine. Both exercise power, but only one does so with legitimate authority. Authority requires legitimacy, and legitimacy is at the heart of political stability. Building on this, the sociologist Max Weber identified three types of authority. Traditional authority is rooted in customs and traditions, like monarchies that pass power through generations. Charismatic authority rests on the personal appeal of a leader. Think of figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or Nelson Mandela. Finally, legal rational authority comes from established laws and institutions, the kind we find in constitutional democracies. These categories help us understand why people obey some leaders but resist others. Let's further discuss Max Weber and the types of authority. Max Weber, one of the founding figures of sociology, wanted to understand why people obey authority. In other words, what makes power feel legitimate rather than just brute force? His answer was that authority tends to fall into three main types: traditional, charismatic, and legal rational. Traditional authority definition: power rooted in long-standing customs, traditions, or religious beliefs. How it works: people obey not because of laws or personality, but because this is how it has always been. The weight of history gives the leader legitimacy. Examples: monarchies where kings or queens inherit the throne through bloodline. Tribal chiefs whose authority comes from lineage and cultural tradition. Religious leaders in communities where faith and tradition carry unquestioned authority. Strengths and weaknesses. Charismatic authority can mobilize people quickly and powerfully, but it is unstable. It often fades when the leader dies, fails, or loses credibility. This is why Weber called it a revolutionary form of authority. It disrupts the old order, but doesn't always leave a lasting system. Legal rational authority. Definition: power rooted in laws, rules, and established institutions. How it works: people obey because they recognize the legitimacy of the system itself, not just the individual leader. Authority is tied to the office, not the person. Examples: modern democracies where presidents, prime ministers, and judges gain authority from constitutions and laws. Bureaucracies where officials follow formal procedures and rules. Elections, courts, and parliaments that distribute power according to established processes. Strengths and weaknesses. Legal rational authority provides consistency and predictability. However, it can feel impersonal, overly bureaucratic, or slow to respond to urgent needs. Why these categories matter. Weber's framework helps explain why some leaders are obeyed while others are resisted. People may obey a king because it has always been so, traditional. They may follow a revolutionary leader because of passion and inspiration, charismatic. Or they may respect a president, not because of personal charisma, but because the office is backed by law, legal rational. Understanding these categories also shows us why authority shifts over time. For example, a charismatic leader may found a movement, but unless their vision is institutionalized into laws, legal rational authority, it may die with them. In short, Weber teaches us that power isn't just about force, it's about legitimacy. People don't just obey because they have to, they obey because they believe the authority is rightful, whether through tradition, personality, or law. Strengths and weaknesses. Traditional authority provides stability, but it can also resist change and innovation. It often breaks down when traditions no longer fit modern circumstances. Charismatic authority. Definition: power rooted in the personal magnetism, vision, or extraordinary qualities of a leader. How it works: people obey because they are inspired by the leader's personality, message, or moral force. It feels almost spiritual or revolutionary. Examples: Martin Luther King Jr., whose authority came from his inspiring vision of justice and equality. Nelson Mandela, admired for his personal courage and ability to unite a divided nation. Religious prophets, revolutionary figures, or even some modern celebrities and influencers. Another crucial term is liberty. We often use the word freedom, but liberty can mean different things. Negative liberty is freedom from interference. The government leaves you alone. Positive liberty is the freedom to fully participate in society, to have the resources and opportunities to live a meaningful life. When we talk about liberty, we often use the word freedom as if it has just one meaning, but liberty can be understood in very different ways. One important distinction is between negative liberty and positive liberty. Negative liberty is the idea of being free from interference. It means that no one, especially the government, steps in to restrict your choices. Think of it as a protective bubble around you. As long as no one breaks through that bubble to control what you say, where you go, or how you live, your liberty is intact. For example, when the government refrains from censoring your speech, that's negative liberty at work. When you're allowed to start a business without unnecessary restrictions, or when you practice your religion without interference, that too is negative liberty. Philosophers like John Locke and later Isaiah Berlin emphasize this kind of freedom, the right to be left alone. And there's also the idea of Republican liberty, which means freedom from domination, not being subject to the arbitrary will of another. These different lenses remind us that liberty is not a simple concept. It is contested, debated, and redefined across history. This distinction matters because it sits at the heart of many political debates. Those who emphasize negative liberty often stress small government and personal responsibility. Don't interfere with my choices. Those who emphasize positive liberty call for governments to ensure equal access to healthcare, education, or economic security so that freedom is not just theoretical but real. Too much emphasis on negative liberty can leave people with rights on paper, but no way to use them. Too much emphasis on positive liberty can risk government overreach in the name of empowerment. So, in simple terms, negative liberty says, no one is stopping me. Positive liberty says, I actually can. Both perspectives are crucial, and balancing them remains one of the great challenges of modern politics. Key use of your freedom. For instance, you may technically be free to pursue any career you want, but if you lack access to education or training, that freedom is limited in practice. You may be free to vote, but if you cannot afford transportation to the polls or face systemic barriers, your liberty is incomplete. Positive liberty is about ensuring that people have the real capacity to act on their choices, not just the legal permission. Thinkers like Rousseau and later advocates of social democracy have argued that true freedom requires this kind of empowerment. And there's also the idea of Republican liberty, which means freedom from domination, not being subject to the arbitrary will of another. These different lenses remind us that liberty is not a simple concept. It is contested, debated, and redefined across history. Closely tied to liberty is the public sphere, the arena where citizens come together to discuss, debate, and decide collective issues. The public sphere is where democracy lives, where voices are raised and ideas exchanged. Yet, critics point out that not all voices are always welcome. Feminist and Marxist scholars remind us that historically, the public sphere often excluded women, minorities, and marginalized groups. So the question becomes, whose voices are heard and whose are silenced? What is the public sphere? The public sphere is a concept most famously developed by philosopher Jürgen Habermas. He described it as the space, physical or symbolic, where citizens gather to debate, deliberate, and shape collective life. It's the town hall meeting, the newspaper opinion pages, the protest in the streets, and in today's world, social media platforms. It's the arena where democracy breathes because it's in these spaces that ideas are exchanged, policies are questioned, and collective action begins. Why it's connected to liberty. Marxist scholars point out that class has always shaped access to the public sphere. Those with wealth, education, and status could speak and be heard, while workers and the poor were often silenced or ignored. Critical race scholars add that racial minorities were also systematically barred or marginalized through segregation, discriminatory laws, or outright violence. So while the public sphere sounds like an open, democratic marketplace of ideas, in practice it has often reflected the voices of the powerful more than the voices of the marginalized. The key question. This brings us to the central question: whose voices are heard and whose are silenced? A truly democratic public sphere requires inclusion, diversity, and equal respect. But even today, barriers remain. Some people have greater access to media platforms, education, and political influence. Others may be drowned out, ignored, or actively suppressed. In short, the public sphere is supposed to be where democracy lives, but democracy is only as strong as the range of voices it allows into the conversation. Liberty, especially in the sense of positive liberty, is not just about what you can do individually. It's also about your ability to participate fully in the civic life of your community. The public sphere is where this participation happens. If you have liberty but no platform or opportunity to express your views, your freedom is incomplete. In this way, liberty and the public sphere are tied together. Freedom is exercised and tested in public debate. Exclusion from the public sphere. However, critics point out that the public sphere has rarely been open to everyone. Feminist scholars note that historically, women were excluded from political debates and decision-making. For centuries, the public sphere was defined as a male domain, while women were relegated to the private sphere of family and home. Finally, Chapter 1 introduces us to different paradigms of power. The pluralist theory argues that power is distributed among many groups. No single group dominates, and democracy is a competition of interests. The elitist theory, on the other hand, suggests that a small number of elites truly hold the power, regardless of democratic appearances. A third view, social movement theory, emphasizes the power of collective grassroots action, that ordinary citizens can, when mobilized, change the course of history. In conclusion, political science is not just about memorizing facts, it's about understanding how power works, why governments function the way they do, and how ideas like liberty, authority, and legitimacy shape our world. This first chapter gives us the vocabulary to analyze politics critically. As we move forward, keep asking yourself, when we talk about government, whose interests are being served? When we talk about liberty, whose freedom is protected? And when we talk about authority, what makes it legitimate? Thank you, and next time we'll dive into Chapter 2, where we explore the world of political ideologies.